Hello everybody and welcome back to another video on my channel. I have moved across country recently. I went all the way from Southern California to Rhode Island, which is basically from one tip of the country to the very opposite end of the country, and that's why I haven't been here. But I'm back, I'm making miniatures. I have plans for miniature videos for the rest of the year basically, at least every other week, so we're back, we're good. Moving across country, I bought a home, but my home did not come with a pool. I've never had a pool, but when it's hot out, you know, you just want to be in a pool. So I decided I was going to make an aerial view of a pool, and that is the Shadowbox Diorama I'll be working on in this week's video. You hear a little bit of click clacking, that's my dog. He's being moody right now. He's walking all over the place. But I just wanted to work with some resin because I've worked a little bit with resin in the past, never in miniature kind of capacity. I've tried making like little baubles, but I wanted to work in it in a more artistic diorama direction, and so I figured this would be a good test because I actually have an idea for a full diorama that'll use some resin, which kind of freaks me out. So I needed something to test it, and I thought, why not a pool, right? That's easy, I thought. Spoiler alert, it was not easy. But we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna jump into the video. You're gonna see what happened. I wanna talk all about it. All the trials, tribulations, all the bad things, because trust me, a lot of things came up. But I'm gonna go ahead, we're gonna turn around, and we're gonna start watching me try and build this diorama. When I decided to make this, I decided I wanted to make a pool floaty to go in the pools because, you know, pool floaties are fun and I thought it would look cool in the diorama. The issue is that I wanted to make my own floaty. So I started off with polymer clay. Now, I am not good at polymer clay. I struggle with it and I thought that maybe I just hated polymer clay and it was stupid, but I've gotten a lot of recommendations and ways to actually work with clay better. I've heard things like food processor will break it up and then you can reform it, that it needs to be really warm, that you can get a pasta roller. I'm gonna keep trying, but me and some craft supplies, we don't get along so great. So I tried, I struggled. My goal was to make this out of polymer clay so that I can then make a silicone mold and cast it in resin. And so I kept trying to make the polymer clay version look like a pool floaty. The issue I kept running into is I kept getting these strange lines. Now, I didn't mind fingerprints because I didn't think they would show up in the resin, and I don't think they still have. The issue I was running into is when I was trying to combine the polymer clay to make the tube, it was looking very weird. I couldn't get it smooth looking, and I've gotten some tips on how to. Now, I think it was baby oil. I have to go back and look at the things I wrote down, but I got some ideas now on how I can make it look better. But at the time, was I struggling very, very, very hard. I was struggling so difficult to make it look like the tube. And then it got to points where I actually thought it looked okay, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna fix this little bit, and then I'd ruin it. And then I had to start over. And I started over about 3 times before I finally decided to go with a different approach to this, which was to make a little donut shape and then to just push in the center, because I figured if I make a donut shape and push in the center, it'll be perfectly smooth already. And to be honest, this kind of worked at first. I thought it looked good. But then I tried to make the inner lines to make it look like, you know, an inflatable. But when I did that, I wasn't paying attention and smashed the other side. So I did have to make this again, but only once. I think I only remade it once at this stage. And then I decided, time to move on. This is as best as it's going to get. Which first meant I took this tool and I made these little lines because I thought, you know, it's an inflatable. It's going to look a little wrinkly. So I took this tool from the Dollar Tree and I made some little wrinkle lines. And then I wanted it to look like an actual floaty where, you know, you can see the seam line in the middle where they put it together. So I made this long snake and I put it along the edge and then I worked it in, kind of smearing it into the polymer clay to look like an actual edge. If you work with polymer clay, you know what I mean when I say smear. I wanted to use recyclable material if I could. So I used this old Sprite cup and I washed it out, which is why it's wet. Don't worry, I dried it, to make the silicone mold. And I originally wanted to use the bottom of the cup, but as you can see, it's raised strange at the bottom. So I couldn't actually do that because it wouldn't hold down correctly, the polymer clay. So instead, I decided to use the lid of the cup. Looking back, this wasn't the best decision because I ended up wasting a lot of silicone. I say both sometimes on accident, ignore me. But I ended up wasting quite a bit. But what I did was I put the tape down and then I taped this to it, because I saw online that you can use tape as basically a barrier so that way the silicone won't run when you pour it. It kind of acts the same way as hot glue does when you're trying to pour resin and you don't want it to leak. That hot glue can kind of work as a barrier. And to make sure it was stuck down, I took a little tool, went around the lid rim and made sure it was really stuck to the tape. I'd never used silicone before, but I was suggested this brand by Rachel at Little Room and Board on TikTok, so I decided to give it a try because why not? I had no idea what I was doing.
Rachel actually used this silicone mold kit so she could make an inflatable 90s chair for a 90s bedroom that she had. So I knew that it would work in an inflatable kind of way. I wore protective gear because I read over the box, but I didn't really see any like dangerous stuff. But I still wore gloves. I still wore masks just in case, because why risk your health? And to be honest, this actually worked really well. This silicone was really easy to work with. Like I said, I've worked with resin a little bit in the past, which is, in my opinion, very difficult to work with. The silicone, though, so easy. So easy to work with. I just poured it over and it cured beautifully. No issues at all. You just follow the instructions and it works. I did have to mix a little bit more because I didn't mix enough originally, but worked perfectly. 100% recommend this if you want to make your own mold. Getting the polymer clay out of the mold was a little difficult, but you just take your time, go slow so you don't rip it, and you'll be fine. And I did have a clip of me completely taking it out, but honestly, as you can see here, I didn't get the best angle. My hand was kind of in the way, so I went ahead and cut it out, but it came out pretty easily in the end. Just go slow and be careful, and it'll be fine. Next was making the actual pool. And so as you can see on the bottom part of the pool here, which I forgot to record a clip, I got these new shadow boxes from Michaels and I'm not the biggest fan of. I honestly think they switched out the quality because this size now is plastic, but that's besides the point. I glued down a piece of mat board and I measured out where I wanted the pool to sit so that way I could add in stone texture. And then I realized that I needed to do some kind of support in the back, which is what the cardboard pieces are. And I used the mat board as the actual walls of the pool. If that doesn't make sense, I think you'll see what I mean when I start actually putting it all together. I used hot glue to hold these down when I would normally use tacky glue, specifically because I know that resin is notorious for finding any little crack that is there and leaking out. So I wanted to use hot glue as people use it as like a barrier. It doesn't leak through hot glue. And I know that hot glue is like chunkier when you put it down. So I put down a lot of hot glue, a lot of hot glue. So that way it would hold the resin in the long run. And I think that I'm an overgluer. I'm definitely an overgluer. It took a lot of Googling to find the right shade of blue, which I ended up going with one I already had, but pools can be a lot of shades of blue, I found out. And so I put the paint in here. And honestly, I would recommend never put paint directly on your project. I don't know why I did this. In fact, I had to take a lot out and wipe it off on a paper towel. Don't do what I did. Do it on the side, just paint into it. But this is the paint color I went with in the end. I don't even remember what it's called, but I think it looks very 90s also, which is why I got it originally. Then it was time for the dreaded resin. I have to say it, make sure you're always wearing gloves and mask. I have a giant air filter in my studio that is like an industrial sized one. Always have a window open and a fan because these fumes are really bad for you. And even with all this, with protective eye gear, my eyes did burn a little bit. But I did mix the resin and then I went ahead and got this alcohol ink, which I bought specifically for this project, which was unneeded. But I added a little bit of pink in, wasn't enough, had to add more pink in to get it to the shade I wanted it to be. And while I just had seen Barbie, it had nothing to do with the shade of pink I chose. I chose the pink because I thought it would look good against the blue of the bottom of the pool. And I know right here, if you are a resin person, you probably think you're pouring this way too fast. There's going to be bubbles. I'm fully aware, I know, but I figured it's a floaty, so it doesn't really matter if there's some bubbles in there. You probably won't see them anyway. As you can see here, the color is beautiful. It came out good, but unfortunately, this color does not stay. You'll see soon. I decided because I have a couple of other resin projects that I have in mind eventually that I would just get some reusable stuff because I didn't want to keep wasting. So I had bought this reusable resin mixing kit and I did the proper thing where you do it by volume, not by weight. And I don't know if it made any difference, to be honest. I wanted the floaty to be a little raised, not that I think you can even tell in the end. So I did a small layer of resin at the very bottom to also help check for leaks to make sure this wasn't going to just leak all over my desk. And I forgot to show me pouring it, but here's the clip of it when it is all dry and shiny. And it looked good. That meant it was time to do the other layer of resin because I wanted it to be slightly submerged underwater or under resin to make it look like it was underwater. And I know this may look like it was quick, but this was over several days. There was a day of drying and then pouring and more drying and pouring and more drying. So just know that this is a several day process. Because the bottom hadn't leaked, I hoped that the top wouldn't. So I went ahead and started pouring. I saw people use this stick method. I think this is to help prevent bubbles. And I know it looks like I'm doing it fast, but this is on 4 times speed. So it wasn't that fast. I actually did this much slower because this was going to be the top layer of resin. And I did not want it to have a lot of bubbles. And I also actually took a lighter to the surface afterwards to pop some of the small bubbles that had surfaced. I was okay with a little bit of bubbles because it's a pool. So, you know, air gets in pools. And now we're getting to the part where things start to go downhill. Things start to go downhill real fast because I wanted it to look like there was a little bit of movement around the pool floaty. And I saw people use tacky glue before to make like a little bit of wave, not a wave, but like a little movement in the water. And I know you can use UV resin, but UV resin's expensive and I already had tacky glue. So I decided to try the tacky glue method. And man, did this just nosedive in quality. I started panicking. But when the glue first dried, I was like, oh, this is fine. This doesn't look terrible. You know, this actually looks a little bit like movement. But let me add some dry brushing to it because dry brushing and me are not total mortal enemies. And this will totally turn out fine. Because, you know, every time I've dry brushed in the past on any project, it totally was fine. There was no panicking. There was no nothing. It was just perfect. But let me tell you, I did not wipe this brush off good enough. I used too much white. It was just too much. It was too much white. And then I thought, okay, let me add a little bit more white, like it's fading out kind of, but that doesn't make any sense with water. And I just kept adding more paint. And oh my gosh, if you could have been there in my mind, it was, thinking back is just anxiety through the roof. I was absolutely sure I had panicked, and I thought I had recorded more clips to show you why I was panicking, but it turns out I was panicking so much, I just did it all in one clip. So basically what I did is I added too much white, and it looked terrible. It looked like I painted resin white. It didn't look like I had done any kind of dry brushing, and so what I did is I put more glue on top, hoping that the glue would kind of sandwich the white to try and hide it, and in the end, it does help, but it is way more movement than I would have liked. It honestly looks like somebody with a floaty around them jumped into a pool, and that's the movement. Like, it's too much movement that it doesn't look the best. But I don't hate it. I think that it turned out fine. I just think that I've learned from my mistakes in this situation. And at this stage, I didn't think it looked terrible. I thought the movement was fine. The wave of it looked fine. But then I realized, is this starting to look like somebody shot a piece of glass with a bullet? But I decided to persevere because all miniatures have an ugly stage, and I started gluing around the edge that was going to be the little walkway concrete like border that you see around pools. And after I was done with that, I went around with the blue paint to kind of overlap onto the top so that way the color would look uniform. There wouldn't be any kind of white showing because the inner liner of a pool has to be blue all the way up to the concrete liner, so that's what I did. And I wanted it to look kind of like paver stones. You know how pools are lined with like those tile paver stone type things. But I decided to just go ahead and carve lines into the mat board. And I know right now you can't really see it, but in the end you can see it much better. At first I thought I was going to cut them out individually and glue them on, but the way that this is structured, it would have just collapsed under its own weight. I know that may not make sense, but it would have imploded basically in along the edges and not looked crushed. So I had to just have one solid piece around the outside that I could then carve to make look like smaller little paving stones. Next, I laid down a layer of gray, and originally I was going back around with my X-Acto blade trying to scoop the paint out of the lines that I made because I was afraid they would get too filled in, but honestly it ended up just being a waste of time because it didn't fill in the lines enough to not be able to see them. So I went ahead and laid this first layer down. I tried also painting the grout lines white. That did not work at all. So I went ahead and got rid of that and decided I was going to dry brush it, even though, you know, we're best friends, totally not mortal enemies or anything. I decided to go ahead and try and dry brush again. And it turned out good. I made sure this time with the dry brushing to go very light with the amount of color I was putting on because I also didn't want it to look that different. I just wanted a small highlight, which is what dry brushing is supposed to be. Yeah. But I went ahead and just added a tiny little bit of color. It really helped the lines stand out, I think. And you can definitely see it when I show it close up in a second. I think that the dry brushing really helped the grout lines stand out, even though they weren't full with a different color. And here I am fitting the Shadowbox on, which I did struggle a little bit with. I had to trim a little bit of the concrete for it to actually fit in, but then once I did, it fit perfectly. It just went ahead and it slid right in. But I will say, again, quality went down a little bit, I think. These ones are plastic now. They used to be wood. Not sure what happened there. Despite my feelings about the plastic, I think in the long run it looked good. This does look very fingerprinty. I tried cleaning it off, but there's glass, there's plastic, there's resin, and you're going to see a little bit of fingerprints, unfortunately. In the end, I really like it. I really like how it turned out, and I think it's going to look really good on my wall. And the little thing at the bottom is just something I wiped off. It's not actually an issue with the shadow frame. I just didn't notice it when recording the clip.
And that's it. That's the diorama. It's right here. I like it. There are things about it that I don't necessarily, and I would do differently. I wouldn't say I don't like it. There are things I would definitely do differently. As I mentioned before, I thought it kind of looked like a bullet hole for a lot of this. I don't think it does anymore, but also this thing, the floaty, pool floaty, ended up being a little bit bigger than I wanted. I wanted this to be a full pool aerial view, and if this was a full pool, this floaty would be gigantic. Also, what I learned about this is that resin, inside resin, reacts weird, because as you saw earlier, this floaty was very, very, very bright pink. And in here, even when I turn to the side, it's this darker pink. And it's so strange because it started to look like that when I poured the resin that was the pool water. That's really the biggest takeaway I have from this video, I think, is that, first of all, resin is difficult. It is difficult to work with, and it can be dangerous if you're not safe. So be safe if you want to use it. But the biggest takeaway is that it reacts weird to itself. I never would have thought that it would look so different. I never thought that it would take the neonness. I really thought it was gonna stand out, and I thought that it would be a good contrast color to the blue of the pool. But as you can see, it ended up looking like this, which it doesn't look bad at all, in my opinion. I just think I maybe would have used more color. Although to be honest, if I used more color, it would have looked like this still. It just would have been darker. So, I don't know. If you work with resin and you know anything about resin, I'm sorry I keep hitting the light with this. If you know anything about resin, you work with resin, let me know why you just know things about color and ink. Why did that happen? I have literally no idea why that happened. I cannot figure it out. But that's it. This is gonna go right there for now. I'm not sure. I have some shelves I'm putting up this in my new studio office. Yes, I have a studio. That's something I never thought I'd be able to say, and I have a studio now. So I'm hoping that's gonna go up on one of my shelves. I believe I'm gonna end up keeping this one. I do sell some of my shadow boxes, but this one I'm going to keep, at least for now, because I like it. Like I said, there are some things I would do differently, but I like it. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I do have videos planned for the rest of the year, at least every other week, but actually in October, I'll have a video out every week. So if you like me or you like miniatures, make sure you hit that subscribe button below, and I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.